So the next story I want to talk about, we are discussing a report that came out of the Fraser Institute. And what it said is that under our current leadership, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is amassing the most debt for the country, and more specifically, the most personal debt for Canadians. He is setting a record to do this, and he is doing it without a major war or a recession. That he is the worst prime minister for racking up debt for Canadians without a major war or a recession. That's really should be all you need to know. But let's look into this. So the Fraser Institute went all the way back to Confederation, and they looked into how much debt was amassed from each prime minister. And they took things into consideration. For example, some of the most spending ever done in Canadian history happened during World War I and World War II, and those are understandable. During those major war efforts, you would definitely have to spend more money. So they took those into consideration and didn't really fault the prime minister for that, because things like that are out of their control. Also, when it comes to recession, they also gave him more of a pass on it, saying, recessions a lot of times are out of the prime minister's control, and they're just forced to deal with it. So they took those into account. But what this report says is historical context is important for understanding debt accumulation under various prime ministers. For example, total growth in debt per person under Sir Robert Borden, 188%, and William Lyon Mackenzie King, 145%, took place during global conflicts, the two world wars, and multiple economic downturns. Economic downturns, which are out of the direct control of the prime minister, contribute to the accumulation of the government debt. The federal government collects less revenue and spends more during an economic downturn as Canadians make greater use of services such as employment insurance. However, of the prime ministers who did not face a global conflict or economic downturn during their tenure, the analysis finds that by the end of his term in 2019, Justin Trudeau is expected to be the largest debt accumulator, 5%. The only other two prime ministers to increase federal debt without fighting a world war or experiencing an economic downturn are Sir Mackenzie Bowell and Sir John Abbott, who both served in the late 19th century. So as we take a look at our first graph here, we can see that it measures all the way from 1939. So this graph here is taking all the way from 1939, beginning of the Second World War. And as we take a look at this graph, we can see that the spending after the Second World War, the debt after the Second World War dropped. Then it began a steady increase throughout the time, raised sharply under Harper, but that one was due to the 2008 bankers crash that happened, so that was why he did. And then under Harper, we pretty much had a steady decline until he reached the very last year. But as we can see, when Justin Trudeau took over, he immediately, all the way up to now, 2017, has continuously been growing more and more in personal debt. So another article that was put out by the Fraser Institute was Prime Minister Trudeau on track to set record for increasing federal debt. Just 2 years into his first mandate, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's legacy on federal debt has taken form, and is not good. Trudeau in his first term is on track to increase federal debt by more than any other prime minister not burdened by war or recession. Racking up debt is no small matter. When government debt grows, more resources are needed to pay for interest costs, diverting tax dollars away from public programs and services. Increasing the debt also saddles future generations with higher taxes to pay for today's government spending. They're talking about us. Anybody my age, around my age, or a little bit younger, we're the ones who are going to be paying for this in the future. I think this is literally going to breed a bunch of conservatives in my generation for this sole reason. I seriously think once millennials see how much shit and how much debt Trudeau has left us in, I really think they're going to see a big push away from liberalism, and you're going to see a lot more millennial conservatives pop up. Only 7 other prime ministers in Canada's 150-year history have similarly not faced a world war or recession during their tenure. Of these prime ministers, Trudeau is expected to increase per-person federal debt the most, by a projected 5% when his first term ends in 2019. While 5% may seem like a small amount, it's the equivalent of $97 billion in new debt, or $1,396 more debt for each Canadian to shoulder. holy shit. I don't have that type of money, do you? And think about it, that's everybody. That's the senior, that's the fucking newborns, that's everybody. So if we take into account those who can't work and those because they're too elderly or disabled, and those who are too young to work, then think about how much more that increases for every single millennial. That number probably would go up 3-4 times. So now we're talking about an extra 5,000 debt per working millennial, essentially. I'm just guesstimating these numbers. I have no basis for these numbers. In stark contrast, other liberal prime ministers who also did not face a world war or recession during their tenure reduces per person federal debt. Jean Chrétien, he reduced by 13%, Paul Martin by 8%, Lester Pearson by 6%. In total, 5 prime ministers of 8 who governed in the absence of world war or recession reduced the inflation-adjusted per person federal debt burden. Unlike Prime Minister Trudeau, these prime ministers seized the opportunity in times of relative peace and economic stability and left a legacy of lower debt for future Canadians. That doesn't mean they were good prime ministers. Paul Martin was weak, and Jean Chrétien lost a lot of fucking money. Well, lost it. I mean, it went missing, and everyone's pretty sure it was pocketed by his liberal government, and his excuse was, we have the money, we just don't know where it is. And that money never turned up again. So that doesn't mean they were good, but hey, they did lower our personal debt. After only 2 years in office, Trudeau's legacy on federal debt is already becoming clear, and future generations of Canadians will pay for it. Financial Post jumped on this, and they ended up saying about how spending is now 22% higher than the peak incurred during the depth of Second World War under William Lyon Mackenzie King. 22% higher. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau began to increase per-person spending immediately after his election in October 2015. The Harper Conservatives originally planned for per-person spending to reach $7,342 in 2015, but the Trudeau Liberals cranked this up to $7,557. Put differently, the Trudeau Liberals increased per-person spending in 2015 by almost 3% more than the previous Harper government had planned. Spending was further increased in 2016, and the federal government's plan to spend $8,337 in the current fiscal year, 2017-2018. This is only $38 shy of the all-time high-level per-person spending record in 2009-2010 by Harper's Conservative government. The peak spending under the Harper government, however, was done during a significant global recession. So as we take a look at our second graph here, which is a closer up on the finish here, I added in, on this graph, I added in the names of the prime ministers, and also at the top, as you can see, I added in which political party they are affiliated with. So it's true, as we look here, it seems to be about 2008, 2009, and 2010 when we had that peak right there, roughly. But then since then, Trudeau has pretty much, if we look at it close, he's about matched what Harper's highest debt was, and that was during the worst recession we had had since the Great Depression. So this is where Trudeau has left us. Anybody out there that has seen my videos that does like Trudeau, because I tend to smash him a lot, I hope you're starting to see what I see, what I saw from, not from right at the beginning, but pretty damn early on. I didn't vote for Trudeau, but when he came into office, I said to myself, all right, let's see what he can do. Pretty much the same thing I said about Trump. Let's see what he could do. And early on, I was not impressed. The only thing I would say that I defended him early on was that fucking elbow gate, which some may remember, which he accidentally elbowed a female NDP member. That one I thought was a bullshit claim by the NDP. The only thing Trudeau did wrong in that situation, the NDP were blocking the Conservative whip from getting to the front during the beginning of Parliament. And Trudeau walked up, grabbed him by the arm, and helped him get through the NDP. He was pretty much just pissed off that they were deliberately blocking him. But the Conservative whip was not happy that Trudeau did that and grabbed his arm and helped him through. So that's where Trudeau fucked up. But as for the whole elbow thing, it was bullshit. Anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about, just quick Google will show you what it is. There's a video of it. It's like 30 seconds. Just go check it out. You probably find it on YouTube. But as we return to the Financial Post article, it goes, spending is also 14.4% higher than the peak of federal per-person spending reached under Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. Trudeau Sr. Unlike his father's record of spending, Trudeau's current plan is actually start reducing per-person spending next year. The federal government's most recent budget called for a 1.1% reduction in per-person spending by 2019-2020. This stands in stark contrast to the Prime Minister's father who, along with his predecessor Lester Pearson, ramped up federal per-person spending adjusted for inflation from 2,837 in 1962 to a peak of 7,288 in 1982, an increase of 156.9%. So we seem to have a little bit of conflict here from the Financial Post and the Fraser Institute that was written, because here they're suggesting that Lester Pearson ramped up federal per-person spending. But at the same time, if we look back at the Fraser Institute, they're saying that he dropped it by 6%. I think in this situation, I'm a little more inclined to go along with the article written from the Fraser Institute on that, because they were the one that conducted the survey. So I believe that they're probably more right on Lester B. Pearson. But there's no doubt that Trudeau Sr. ramped up a lot of spending on personal debt during his time in office. I've heard countless older people who have lived through Trudeau Sr.'s tenure that he did ramp up a lot of debt and spending. Whether the federal government will follow through on its plans to reduce federal spending in the 2 years prior to the next federal election is a legitimate question, but it's nonetheless the current plan. That said, even with the planned 1.1% reduction in federal per-person spending, the federal government will expect at least $23.4 billion deficit in 2019-2020. To reach a balanced budget in those years, which was the Liberal Party's original campaign commitment, the government would have to reduce per-person spending by 6.4% over the next 2 years. That would be a ridiculous amount. That would be 3.2% every year, and I don't know if we could do that. I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot when we're talking percentages, but it is a lot of money in real terms. A lot of debt would have to be canceled out by Trudeau, which I don't see happening, but it is supposed to happen within the next 2 years. Once again, though, 3.2% each year at least in order to get that done. So because I was trying to get the other side's view on this as well, I pulled up a couple articles on it. First one's from the Ottawa Sun, the second one's from the Toronto Sun. The Suns are generally a more conservative paper, so I wanted to get their opinion on it. And in fact, it was actually... it was the Ottawa Sun I saw this article in originally. I was sitting in a McDonald's with my wife, and there just happened to be a paper on the table. I flipped through and I saw that, so this is really what led me on the way. But in this article from the Ottawa Sun, they ended up having a quote from Charles Lemam, the Fraser Institute Director of Fiscal Studies, and he ends up saying, "The government debt matters. Higher debt means more tax dollars are diverted away from important public programs, and it leaves future generations on the hook to pay for today's spending." Of prime ministers who did experience recession or World War during their time in office, Stephen Harper increased per-person federal debt by 11%, Brian Mulroney by 42%, and Pierre Trudeau by 57% during his second term in office from 1980 to 84, and by 35% during his first term in office from 1968 to 1978. The Fraser study assessed the debt accumulation records of 20 of Canada's 23 prime ministers going back to Confederation in 1867, excluding only Kim Campbell, John Turner, and Charles Tupper because their terms in office were too short to provide reliable data. Each one had not even a year in office, maybe a year in office before they were out. As we move on to the Toronto Sun article, it says, during the 2015 election, Trudeau predicted his budget would balance itself with a $1 billion surplus in the fourth and final year of his election mandate in 2019. At the time, he also predicted the federal government under his leadership would experience a modest deficit of $9.9 billion in 2016-2017, $9.5 billion in 2017-2018, and $5.7 billion in 2018-2019. But that was then, and this is now. In Tuesday's economic statement, Morneau reported Canada's deficit in 2016-2017 was actually $17.8 billion, 80% higher than Trudeau predicted in 2015. Going forward, Morneau predict the deficit will be $19.9 billion in 2017-2018, 102% higher than Trudeau said it would be, and $18.6 billion in 2018-2019, 226% higher than Trudeau said it would be. This is why I was nervous about his plan, because his plan required everything to work perfectly. And there's so much unforeseen circumstances that happen within 4 years. A very good example would be the hurricanes that happened back in the summer that flooded parts of Quebec. Nobody could see that coming, but it happened. And then we had to take care of that. That would cost millions of dollars to clean up. In 2020, the year Trudeau predicted Canada would achieve a $1 billion surplus under his fiscal leadership, Morneau now predicts the deficit will be $17.3 billion. Should Trudeau win the next federal election in 2019, Morneau predicts Trudeau's deficit will be $16.8 billion in 2020-2021, $13.9 billion in 21-22, and $12.5 billion in 22-23. So Trudeau is the spending prime minister. That really seems to be all he's been doing, is just spend, 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 which he did say that he was going to be spending under his time. He did say that, we have to spend, and then eventually once we spend on infrastructure, the budget will balance itself. Yeah, that's not happening. Under Trudeau's Liberal government, we're seeing some of the worst debt we've ever accumulated, and this just over the last 2 years, the amount he's gotten is scary. Now let's look at how much is going to happen over the next 2 years, and come hell and high water, should he be elected again come 2019, which, as one older friend that I speak to, Vince, he's told me before that very many prime ministers, more than not, will get a second term in office. I am hoping this is not Trudeau. But there's a good chance that he will get another term in office, because many prime ministers do. They get at least 2 years. And even recently, when was the last time a president only had 1 term in office? Hell, maybe Trump will be the first one in a while to only have 1 term in office, but if we think back, it's been a while. So all this debt Trudeau is building up is going to come back on us younger people. I'm not crazy for what's coming, because I look around now, I see my groceries have gone up. Some of my bills are going up. My landlord recently just installed, for anybody living in Minto in Ottawa, I'm sure you can relate, my landlord just installed paid visitors parking. Yeah, like you would do downtown in a city, you now have to pay just to use the visitors parking. This means that if somebody wants to come up to my apartment for 5 minutes to come grab something, they've either got to pay for an hour to park there, which sure, it's only $1, but you're still fucking paying, or they've got to park it there, and then they've got to risk that Minto security doesn't come around and then ticket them. Because even if it's 5 minutes, ever since they put those up, the security cars have been making a lot of patrols around the visitors parking to make sure people are using them. So this is what's happening under Trudeau. I do think that everything is related. The higher groceries, I do think that my landlord raising my rent recently and my landlord installing these has to do with the way the economy is doing it under Trudeau. If we had a better economy, like, our landlord now is pinching for every pennies they can get, and they're doing it from everybody, and everybody's doing that now because of all the taxes Trudeau is introducing and all the debt he's accumulating. I worry that he's going to put us in, by the time he's done, into a shithole. But there's nothing we can do right now. With a Liberal majority government, and as much as he talks about a transparent government, he tends to seem to rule it with an iron fist. They have to vote certain ways, and if he feels that he wants his whole cabinet to vote on him, they've got to, or they face disciplinary actions. Trudeau is one of the worst prime ministers we've ever had. He honestly is one of the worst prime ministers. I think that even if Pierre Elliott Trudeau's name is still held in some high esteem by some people, and really it's because he was the one who started the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, I do have a feeling that the Trudeau name, especially after Justin's been in office, is officially been dragged through the mud, and that after this, nobody's going to want a Trudeau. If Justin's son or daughter comes up and wants to be in politics and wants to be prime minister someday, I'm hoping that the millennials will remember that we already went through this, and and I'm hoping that our kids will have enough common sense that we can talk to them and say, guys, we've already done this twice with Trudeau's and we got fucked over royally. Do not make the same mistake a third time. Because Generation X made that mistake, and now Generation Y, my generation, the millennials, have made that mistake. Let's make sure that Generation Z does not make that mistake as well. Because if we do, we're going to be recovering from this for a long time after Trudeau's done. I mean, just take a look at the debt. You can see here, we're up to $1 trillion in debt according to the National Debt Clock.org. We got $1 trillion in debt. I remember under Harper that we were up to $500 billion, and everyone was like, holy shit. Now, look at where we're at. Look at our interest per year. $28 billion per year is our interest. Our interest per second, $889. We're up to $31,000 in debt each, and our debt is 61.9% of our current GDP. What the hell are we going to do? How are we supposed to solve this problem? Where is this money we're going to come from? I mean, this is like a person being in debt and going on a gambling spree at a casino. It's the worst thing you can do. And now you're selling off pieces of your home, your furniture, your electronics, your car. This is what it seems like we're doing right now. It's going to lead us down a bad path. I really worry about how this is going to affect me and my family, and how this is going to make things a lot harder in the future for every Canadian out there. Because I've also noticed historically what ends up happening a lot is that countries, in a desperate attempt to hold on, will mass print money. They will just keep producing money. They water it down to the point where your money is meaningless, and then you default anyway. It's like using a credit card to pay off your bills, like using a credit card to pay off a credit card. Sooner or later, you might stay ahead of the game for a while, but sooner or later, that entire massive debt that you've accumulated is going to build up, and you're going to have to pay it off. That's exactly what's happening here. So, come 2019, vote out Trudeau. Do not fall for his charm or his nice hair or his social justice or his feminism. Vote him out.